you're an idiot. He's a Tiger. You're going to get your butt beat. Like, seriously, why would you stir up the Chiefs? Like, they're laughing.
This is the Lombardi Line with former NFL executive Michael Lombardi. Now here is your host, Stormy Buonantony, on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.
We're going to go through the list 1 through 5, but we might as well start at the top, where you think Jim Harbaugh was the best get for any team, and he goes to the LA Chargers. Why?
Well, because they need toughness. They need mental and physical toughness, and they need an identity, right? They never really have had an identity for a while. They've always tried to hire coaches and kind of gone the different route. I mean, Marty Schottenheimer probably, Norv Turner, they had a little bit of an identity there, but this is the first time that they've hired somebody who could kind of handle the LA market, if you will, right? I mean, he's a big name. You know, he could probably get a table over at Craig's in West Hollywood immediately, right? They know who Jim Harbaugh is. So I think it's huge. I think he gives them toughness, physicality, everything that they didn't have with Staley. Now, I think it's going to be a work in progress. The offensive staff is fascinating to me. He hired Mark Trestman, who was his quarterback coach, who was his first coordinator when he became a coach at the Raiders. He's got Roman in there, who Roman might have the title of coordinator, but then they've got Trestman for the passing game, Marcus Brady for the passing game. There's a lot of chefs in that offensive meeting room, which I think Jim likes. I think Jim wants to be able to be the guy that says, okay, here's what we're doing, here's the way I want to do it, and not give somebody all the authority to run it. Because we know if Roman's going to run the offense, there's going to be it's not going to be a passing game. It's going to make Justin Herbert happy. And they kept Herbert's quarterback coach, so that makes him happy.
Yeah, and for a franchise that has a lot of on-paper talent but hasn't had the winning, hasn't had that translate to winning, I think his proven track record of turning around teams and organizations that have been struggling in recent history is important. This is a Chargers team coming off a 5-12 season. We'll see if Jim can do with them what he did for the 49ers and for Stanford and San Diego and Michigan, everywhere that he has been since. Let's go to number 2 on your list, in the Big D, where that defense will now fall under Mike Zimmer. Your number 2 hire this offseason is Zimmer replacing Dan Quinn in Dallas.
Well, I mean, I think, look, Dan Quinn's a really good coach, and he kind of has his own way. And I think if you read some of the commentary that's come out about what happened there, Dan kind of was player's coach, player friendly. Zimmer is tough. Zimmer gives them some toughness. He'll give them soundness in the run game, something they haven't had. You know, I think Dan was always trying to rob Peter to pay Paul, you know, trying to move things around. Zimmer's a tough guy. He'll give them toughness, and then on third down, he'll give the offense a lot of problems. And I don't think Mike's lost his love of the game or lost his zip of the game. I think it's still going to be strong. He hired Paul Gunther to be his run game coordinator. Those two were in Minnesota. They were in Cincinnati together. So the scheme will fit the system. They'll get Parsons in a lot of different spots. I like this hire a lot because I think he's going to hold the players accountable in his unique style. Now, will that work? We saw with Vic Fangio, they didn't like it down in Miami. Well, I think they're going to have to like it in Dallas.
Yeah, and I think about this Dallas Cowboys team and how early on in the season they come across as those bullies and those thumpers on defense, and they did have that physicality, but then it just slowly starts to go away, especially in the postseason where you want that to ramp up. That's when it was all but eliminated, and even Micah Parsons was talking about that Green Bay game where they just showed up tired. I think Zimmer will be important for them most in those critical games in the playoffs. Now, you mentioned Vic Fangio. He just happens to be number 3 on your list as he leaves Miami and heads out to Philly.
Well, again, I think they need accountability on defense in Philadelphia. I think they need somebody who's going to command the room. And I think Vic will do that. Plus, Vic has had a working relationship with Nick Sirianni. He was helping him as a consultant. They're going to get sound. They're going to be complex on defense. And I think he'll get the defensive front in shape and rely on that ability to rush the passer, which they didn't have. 2 years ago, 60 of their 70 sacks came out of the defensive front. Last year, they couldn't put that pressure on. So I like this hire. I think Philly, it needs some toughness. They need somebody to crack the whip on defense. Their defensive front, you look at Jordan Davis, you look at Carter, they all started strong. But by the middle of the year, they were not the same defense at all. They were slow, and they couldn't cover. I think Vic will change that.
And Miami's defense under Fangio improved from 18th in yards allowed to 10th. And despite all the injuries that they had on that side of the ball, they were one of the best defensive teams in the league the back half of the season. Pete Carroll is out in Seattle, but you like his replacement coming over from the Ravens and Mike Macdonald.
I do. I don't know Mike Macdonald, but I've watched him. I've read a lot about him, and I think he's got the right demeanor to change the tenor a little bit. I think if they would have gone with somebody else along the Pete Carroll way, it would not have meant any change. And I think Macdonald's a very curious coach. I think he understands what it takes to be good defensively today with multiplicity, but still have the ability to be sound fundamentally. Take a little bit of that Baltimore program, give them some toughness, and then try to get home field advantage back, right? They give up 170-some yards rushing to the Steelers. I think Macdonald proved that he can get better he can get the players to improve. Clowney had one of his best years for him. Van Noy comes off the Pat McAfee show and has a really good season. So I like this hire a lot. I have a lot of hopes for Macdonald to be a really good coach. I think the staff will be young. I think hiring Leslie Frazier gives him a calming voice, a veteran presence that he needed, and I think that'll help him. I like Seattle's talent more than I like the way they played last year. I thought they underachieved Seattle. I really did. They should not have been as bad defensively as they ended up playing.
Now, number 5, I did not expect. We're doing a little NFL college football crossover here. Wink Martindale no longer with the Giants. He's the defensive coordinator at Michigan as Jesse Minter follows Harbaugh to Los Angeles. And you really like that for the Wolverines.
Well, I think, look, trust me, Ryan Day doesn't like it because he's going to get blitzed from all different places and he's not going to be able to handle it. Wink can do a great job of attacking the protections. And in college football, it's all about attacking the protections. They don't have enough protections. So I think this is a really good hire. I almost put Nick Saban here on ESPN because I think we need his instructions. I think we need his voice, his expertise, his wisdom. Right? I almost put him on this list, but I wasn't sure that the great producer, Mr. Elliott, would have allowed that. But I think Martindale's a great hire for them.
Yeah, Elliott's a tough grader. That's for sure.
I know he is. I know. And so I feel like I'm back at the military academy getting graded by the general here. But the thing about Martindale is I think he'll be able to relate to the players, even though he's an older coach. I think they'll embrace playing for him. And, I know him really well. I like him, and I think it fits. And I think the Moore guy, Sharon Moore, is really a good coach. I think he's humble. What I loved about him was how humble he was. And he's willing to take somebody with the vast experience to help him out.
Clubs will have until March 5th to decide who and if anyone gets tagged. And so before we dive into some specific players and teams, Michael, from your perspective as a former GM, somebody who has sat in that chair in the building, what's most important for people to understand about this time frame?
Everything is about, can we afford to carry him on the cap? Everybody's trying to get their cap in order to, add players, sign their draft choices, get ready for the season, which is long, and you've got to have money to endure injuries that could take place. And then understand that if you do this for a year or 2 years, where does it leave you? The one thing I think good organizations do is they handle what we call sustainable values, which means what we do today, how long will it affect us down the road? Some teams have gone into what we call situational values. Well, let's just do what's best for us today, and who cares what happens? And usually those teams are left with severe problems come their cap. Now, sometimes it works out, right? We saw the Bucs win a Super Bowl when they went all in. We saw the Rams win a Super Bowl. They've gone all in. So it can work, but it's very difficult. And a lot of it comes down to the tolerance of the owner in terms of how much cash over cap they're willing to spend. We talked about it yesterday. Some teams like the Texans spent a lot of money cash over cap last year. Right? And the Jets have spent enormous amounts of money cash over cap. The Browns, over the last 5 years, have been one of the highest spending teams in the league, whereas over in the last 10 years, the New England Patriots have spent no money. And so they're the 32nd team in terms of spending money. So, again, it's not always about the money, it's about the value. And so this time of the year, as a general manager, you really are a bank appraiser. You're appraising the property for the loan that you could potentially make. And you've got to be close on that, because if the player doesn't play to the level, you got a bad contract.
So how soon should we anticipate seeing some of these tags come through? Or is this a thing where you're exhausting all of the time that you can before you ultimately make that choice? How's that work?
Well, it works like this. I call you on the phone, Stormy. You represent a player. I said, look, we want to try to enter it. We want to try to get something done before the franchise tag, before we have to make a decision on the franchise tag, which is in early March. And you would say back to me, well, if you're going to franchise me, I would rather just play on a 1-year deal that's guaranteed, or give me 3 years at that number as it goes up. And so now there's the negotiation, right? So now at least we've set the platform. Okay, so let's go back to the table. All right, we think your player is in the top 10 at his position. He thinks he's in the top 5. Now we've established that we're in the same ballpark. And then you go on from there and you negotiate basically what the guaranteed money is going to be and how many years it's going to be. So let's take Saquon Barkley. He's looking at Jonathan Taylor got $14 million. Why would he take less? So now you're Kevin Abrams of the Giants. You're trying to negotiate with Saquon Barkley. You know what Jonathan Taylor got. You know the structure of his contract. And do you have a tolerance to pay it? Or would it be cheaper to just franchise him for another year and just rent him for a year? Those are the conversations that are going on. Because if I call you on the phone and I can't get anything done and you just keep hanging up and not returning my phone call, which good agents will do, because the threat of franchising is the best thing. Because once you get franchised, now we'll hear all the players complain, but it's the best thing that could happen, because they're going to end up making 120% of next year's money, even though they won't have it all guaranteed.
Yeah, okay, so we thought that it would be fun then to play a little game of sign them, tag them, or let them walk. And because you're already teeing up the Saquon Barkley conversation, I guess we can start with that one. What would you do with Saquon Barkley if you're in the Giants' shoes? Sign him, tag him, or let him walk?
I would let him walk. I would only sign him to a contract that I thought was the right contract for us. I know he's a really good player, but the league has taught us that running backs come around quite a bit. They get injured. And every year that you sign a back who gets older, the value of that player goes down. Look, let me ask you this question. If you had a crystal ball on Tony Pollard today, the way he played this year, you think the Cowboys would have franchised him? No chance. No chance. And so to me, you've got to say, okay, Saquon, I know you've probably, it's been 3 years since your knee. You've missed some games, but you've been relatively healthy. You're really a good player. But if you want to make $14 million over 3 years per year, that's just we can't afford to do that. We have too many other areas. We can find a running back.
I don't think it would happen because of all the other people in Dallas that have to get paid, but I would love to see Saquon with a star on his helmet. I think that could be very interesting, especially within the division. But, okay, let's go to another one, because the expectation is that the Bengals are going to tag their wide receiver T. Higgins. Sign him, tag him, or let him walk. T. Higgins, his franchise tag value sitting $20.7 million.
I would franchise him. I would, knowing that I got to have to sign. Whatever I do with Higgins, you're going to have to do it again with Chase. So here's the rub. Can I really have $45 million per year in 2 receivers? Probably not, right? So I would sign Higgins. I would franchise Higgins, and then next year try to sign Chase to a long-term deal. I don't think I can afford both, but I have another year of them. I'll let Boyd go, let him walk. We've drafted receivers. We'll see if we can get them up to speed. But you put this much money into receivers, your right tackle, Jonah Williams, isn't going to be back because, A, he's probably not worth what he's asking for, and can you afford it? Now, they have $60 million of cap room. They have the cap room, but that cap room is going to get eaten fairly quickly until they do the Chase deal. So I would sign Higgins I would just say to him, look, we're franchising you 1 year, that's it.
Yeah, this is the 1-year solution to keep the core of that band together as Joe Burrow comes back healthy, see if they can make a push for the Super Bowl and supplant the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC. How about Panthers defensive end Brian Burns? Teams have tried to trade for him in the past. The team has not budged. His tag value is $20.2 million. Sign him, tag him, or let him walk.
I'm gonna tag him. Again, I think to me, they've turned down so many opportunities to trade him. I think they have to do it, right? I think they have to. And I don't think he's an elite. Look, I think he's a good pass rusher. I don't think he tilts the field, but I think these guys are making really good money, and we saw Sweat's contract come in. He got 8 sacks last year. He's, he can play, make a difference in the game. But for me, with the cap room that they have, I probably do it for 1 year. I don't know if I would enter into a long-term deal. I think Burns is a good player. I don't think he tilts the field. And I don't want to sign a guy that doesn't tilt the field. I need pass rushers, no question. But to me, I need ones that are going to get more than 8 sacks. Now, in fairness to Burns, they never play from up front. So he's never really has a chance to rush, right? They're always behind. I hate to mention that to Chris as a fan of his, but that's the reality.
Yeah, it's okay. My husband, Chris, he understands the reality of the situation in Carolina. It's all right. Yeah. He gets it. But yeah, 8 sacks in 16 games, did have 50 combined tackles, 1 forced fumble, and 1 fumble recovery. Elliot and I were talking about this before the show. Interesting that both Brian Burns and Josh Allen are edge rushers, but their titles, because of the defenses that they play in, defensive end versus linebacker, have different tag values. So while Burns is 20.2, Josh Allen's tag value is 22.7. Sign him, tag him, or let him walk?
I think I'm going to tag him, because look, it's interesting how he's getting $2 million more extra off of Burns. You would think so. Part of Burns' issue too is you got to sign Derek Brown, the defensive tackle. He's good too. How much can you have in both linemen there? So I think to me, I would probably tag Josh Allen and try to enter into a contract where I could get some. You've got a little bit of wiggle room here by technicality. He's really not a linebacker. He doesn't cover anybody, but he's benefiting from that position. It's like the opposite of Kelsey. Kelsey's really a wide receiver, and the club benefited from him being tagged a tight end, but the club gave him wide receiver money because they understood it. They got it. So I think sometimes these are a little bit sketchy.
He, too, coming off a career high in sacks this past year with 17 and a half. Also had 17 TFLs, 2 forced fumbles, a pick, and 66 tackles. How about Michael Pittman? He was another one of those wide receivers that tried to get a deal done last year. It didn't happen. Tell Elliot what he needs to hear. Sign him, tag him, or let him walk.
I'm going to let him walk. I'm going to let Michael Pittman walk. I think Michael's a good player, but I think we can find other guys. I'm not putting $20 million into Michael Pittman. I mean, if I could sign him, if I let him walk, it doesn't mean I don't want to sign him. But, to me, I'm not tagging him for 1 year and going up 120% off of the tag. 4 receiving touchdowns, you're going to get me $20 million. I think he's a good player, but I think I also need other good players around him, so I'm going to hold off.
Earlier this week, Michael, with the franchise tag window officially opening up, we did a little exercise. We started it, but we didn't get to finish it, called Sign 'em, Tag 'em, or Let 'em Walk, looking at some of these players who are up for the franchise tag with their respective teams. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are in a unique situation on the surface where they have 3 players that could be headed for free agency in Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield, and Antoine Winfield Jr. But it seems a little bit obvious that Winfield is going to be the one in that position because of the cost of the tag for the other 2 players. So let's start with Antoine Winfield Jr. Sign him, tag him, or let him walk.
Well, they got to keep somebody, right? And they got some cap issues. You can't tag Mayfield because that number, you start negotiating from that point on. So, to me, you've got a lot of work to do. They're going to be a busy team at the Combine. I think, to me, at worst case scenario, you tag Winfield because he is a good player. You don't want to carry that cap number for as long as you do. That's why they're going to work out these next 10 days and try to work a deal. But for me, I think ultimately you've got to tag him because the other 2 you can't. And you need to keep your players, but they've got so much cap issues they've got to get through. I think it's going to take them a little bit of time.
So with that, what do you think ends up ultimately happening with Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans? Obviously, they both want to stay in Tampa, but is that reality?
Well, I think Mike Evans is going to have a huge market, right? It's all about the market. So I think he's going to have a huge market in terms of getting a number that's close to what he wants. Mayfield's best number is going to come from the Buccaneers. Carolina, his former coach, Dave Canales, I don't think they're going to go for it, certainly because of Bryce Young. But who else is your competition? One thing about quarterbacks, you could sit there and look at your competition. Would the Raiders pay a lot of money for Baker Mayfield and not draft a quarterback? I don't think so. Would Atlanta? He let him on a comeback to win the game in Atlanta. That seems a little bit strange to me. People are trying to put him up in New England, but I don't see that one either. So for me, I would say, the best deal is going to come from the Buccaneers. So that's why I think they'll get him back.
And if you remember, when he and a number of players were out here in Las Vegas for Super Bowl week, the hot mics a little bit when he was leaving one of the sets here in Vegas on Media Row. He was saying like, yeah, our plan is to run it back, and, you know, kind of giving some insight to some of those behind the scenes conversations. So where I sit right now, I still expect Baker Mayfield to come back and be the quarterback of the Bucs, but it's anybody's game in free agency. That is for sure. How about the Raiders running back Josh Jacobs, Michael? Obviously dealt with some injuries this year, ended up with 805 yards, 6 touchdowns in 13 games. So a far cry from last season when he was the NFL's rushing leader. Sign him, tag him, or let him walk?
I'm going to try to sign him. I'm not going to tag him because I've got, you know, that eats up my cap room. And I'm just going to play the game of where I think this could go. Like, let the market declare. There's nothing wrong with letting the market declare what you have to pay. Then you have the option to come back. Because one thing I do know about Josh Jacobs, I think he likes Antonio Pierce. I think he likes playing for the Raiders, and I know the Raiders want him to be there. So I fully expect him to come back and say, okay, you know, what this is what I have in the market. This is what it would take, and here's what I'm going to need, and then see where you go. So I think you'll get first right of refusal. There's nothing wrong with first right of refusal, right? You don't have to tag to get first right of, at least you get the market value.
Michael, do you think that we're going to get another running back Zoom conference this offseason?
Yeah, of course we are. Yeah, we're going to complain about it, and the media will cover it like crazy, and it'll go on. I mean, I don't know why you're going to I mean, look, the reality of it is you've got to find other ways. You can't pay everybody in a cap world. There's always going to be somebody who's going to lose.
No question about that. Let's keep these rolling here with some of the players who are up for a potential franchise tag while the window is open from now until March 5th. Ravens defensive tackle Justin Madubuike, his franchise tag value, Michael, $20.9 million. Sign him, tag him, or let him walk?
I'm tagging him. I'm going to tag him. I mean, look, I want to get him signed to a contract, and I'm going to take the next 10 days, but to find inside defensive lineman is hard. And, you know, you got to pay. I'd rather pay him than Ronnie Stanley. They paid Ronnie Stanley. I'd rather pay him. They need him in there. And I think, to me, you got to pay him. So I'm going to tag him. I'm going to try to get him done before, but I'm going to tag him.
13 sacks, 33 quarterback hits, 52 combined tackles, 12 TFLs, 1 forced fumble for him. Let's stick with the position. Christian Wilkins out there with the Miami Dolphins, Michael. Same tag value, same position, defensive tackle. Sign him, tag him, or let him walk in Miami?
Well, I'm going to tag them, but they have no room to tag them. $51 million, they're over the cap, plus all they talk about is re-signing Tua. So, you know, and Tua's already said it's due to happen, and so they're going to do that. To me, I'm going to keep him. He's going to make a lot of money in the open market. There's no question, because he's a really good player, he can pressure the quarterback. He's not a pass rusher. He can pressure the quarterback. But he's got the ability to make it, take the inside run. He's a physical presence inside, really a good player. I'm definitely tagging him, but they don't have the cap room, Stormy.
So how tough is that from the a general manager perspective? Obviously, you've been in that chair and you've had to go through this entire process when there's so much from the outside looking in, people telling you what you should do, thinking what you should do. You're trying to have the conversation with the player. Hey, I want you around, but can we make the financials work? How difficult are those conversations this time of year?
Well, you're always having them with the agent, not directly with the player. But here's where the hard part gets into, which I don't think the fans understand, is what is the owner's tolerance to spend cash over cap, right? That's the key, because the cap is always going to balance itself out. The owner's eventually going to come out even on the cap because it takes away when you spend cash over cap. For example, the last 10 years, the Patriots have been the lowest spending team in the National Football League. They've won Super Bowls, but they've not spent cash over cap, okay? And that's because they don't have a lot of bad contracts that they redo. They don't want that dead money. But when you have Kirk Cousins and he's eating $28 million of your cap and he's not on your team, you're going to go cash over cap because you're going to have to spend to get some contracts redone. It's a vicious cycle. It's a credit card. And so that's really where the conversation comes in. Now, Stephen Ross, the owner of Miami, he's been spending money like crazy because he wants to win a Super Bowl. And he's not been shy about going cash over cap. It hasn't worked, but he hasn't been shy about it, So I think that's really the conversation that the fans don't see. Everybody thinks because of the cap, everybody's going to spend equally. No, that's not always the case. they're going to spend based on what the owner's tolerance is for cash over cap. The owner could say to you, look, it's your cap, you run it, but there's only so much money on signing bonus and guarantee you can get.
Yeah, for sure. What was just because cap is on the mind right now, what did you think of the number that has been put out there for what the salary cap might raise to? Mike Florio over there of PFT and NBC, he said it could raise to upwards of maybe $250 million.
Look, the cap is tied to revenue, right? The cap is all tied to revenue. So it's the revenue that comes in. That's why when we go to, that's why anybody who gets mad at Taylor Swift for what she's done for the game is they're hurting themselves. They're hurting all of us. Us in television, us in field. Yeah, it's the revenue streams, the ratings come in. All that goes on to the players. The owners don't make all the money. The players get value. Now, the problem is in the league is some of the players that are going to be getting money aren't really worth it. That we're getting further and further away from value. That's the hard part. That's why you have to draft so well. But the money that's coming in is always going to end up getting to the players, which is what it should do. They're the ones who people are watching to play this great game. And it's going to continue to rise because of it.
All right, let's hit one more here before we have to go to the break. Yeah. Sign him, tag him, or let him walk. Bears corner Jalen Johnson, the franchise tag value $18.8 million.
I'm going to tag them. I mean, look, they are the least spending team last year. They spent $190 million of cash last year. They don't really have any. Debt, and so they could easily tag him. And they're not going to pay a quarterback. I think that's pretty clear, right? I think they're going to allow that quarterback to go out and then they'll trade him and do whatever they want to do. But for me, I'm going to keep the best corner and go from there. Now, Eberflus, the way he plays his scheme, this is part of the issue too, is you don't really want to put a lot of money in corners because he's a zone concept guy. And you can find young players in the zone concept that you could put out there. But at some point, you got to play man-to-man. And I just think, to me, you can't let good corners get out there. He'll make more than that in the open market, promise you that.
Is it news?
Corleone is a man who insists on hearing bad news immediately.
Or just noise?
Are you going to act like this is news?
Just noise. This is noise. Let's separate the impactful from the insignificant with one simple question. News or noise?
I feel bad that every day on the show we're talking about Justin Fields in some way, shape, or form, but that's where we're going to start once again here today. You got to. According to a report from Albert Breer, the Bears are meeting over the next couple weeks to finalize plans at quarterback with the expectation they will have a plan in place by the time they are out there in Indianapolis for the Combine. News or noise, Michael?
This is definitely news. They've already got the plan in place. They know what they're going to do. I mean, I think they know they're going to go to the Combine and they're going to sit quietly with teams and say, this is what we're looking for. And then teams are going to say, this is what we're willing to pay and this is what we could do to go forward. To me, it's a little bit more of a tricky trade in this sense. We had Randy Mueller on yesterday, and Randy is of the same opinion that I am, that they may not, there's no number one pick out there for them, is what's been reported. For me, though, here's the issue. Is because he has 1 year left at a reasonable number, and then you've got to pick up the fifth-year option. What are we doing here? There's got to be some form of protection for you if you don't pick up the fifth year. Would you want to give up a second-round pick for a one-year player? I don't think so. So I think there lies the complication within the deal.
It's the trade and the fact that you got to pay the guy as well coming up. Although after he dislocated his thumb, it was a 1-5 start week 6. Once he came back from that thumb, he was significantly better. He was running the football a lot more, had a lot more success. So teams saw what maybe he could be. And while we're on the Justin Fields track, the odds for where he'll take his next snap have dramatically changed over the last 48 hours, Michael, because since the social media sleuths discovered that he doesn't follow the Bears and he follows a couple Falcons players on Instagram, his odds to go to Atlanta went from plus 550 to now an odds-on number at minus 130. Speaking of the Falcons, which leads us to our next news or noise headline. During an appearance on the NFL Report this week, Falcons general manager Terry Fontenot said quarterback is a top priority for them this offseason. I don't think that's shocking anyone based on what we know of Desmond Ridder getting benched multiple times during the season. But news or noise, Michael?
Well, it's completely news. I'm sure Arthur Smith sitting in Pittsburgh in his office over there on the campus of University of Pittsburgh saying, well, wait, why weren't we doing this last year? Like, why all of a sudden do we need a quarterback this year? You guys left me with Ritter. Now they're all going to blame Arthur. Arthur Smith, he better have a truck full to line up all the things he's going to get blamed for in the next 6 weeks. I mean, it's just going to be brutal. It's going to be brutal. But, yeah, I mean, you'd have to be, seriously, you'd have to not pay attention to Atlanta. Now, look, here's the thing about Atlanta. You got to understand something. They don't draw. I mean, do you ever watch their games if you're on the YouTube? Like, there's a lot of empty seats in that place. And, you know, getting a local hero like Fields, and who played high school football in Georgia, he went to Georgia originally, maybe that could entice their fan base, because their fan base is not, I would say, engaged at all in the team. And, you know, I don't know who would engage them, but it would be interesting. Now, is Zach Robinson, who they just hired as the OC, is that going to make him more comfortable? We shall see. But, yeah, I think the fact they need a quarterback is news. They've needed one for 2 years.
Yeah, and I think, like, I mentioned the odd stuff as kind of a joke about social media. All that to say, I think Justin Fields would be a great fit there, and to your point, would be an exciting piece for them looking to jumpstart an offense that hasn't finished in top 10 in points scored since 2018. Now, Michael, I am so excited to share with you some of the best audio in the history of audio. Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce was on the rush with Max Crosby this past week, and while he did give the Chiefs their props for winning another Super Bowl, he also said Vegas is motivated to run it back against the Chiefs. Listen to this, because it's pure gold.
Who's last time to beat the Chiefs? Come on, man. These dudes, you know what I mean? Like, they did that. Yeah. So it's okay. It's cool. Like I told them, like, we're running back. We'll see them again. They got to see us. We got to see them. Yeah. And we already given the recipe of how to do it. You got the Jordan rules, and I'm calling now from now on, as long as I'm here, the Patrick Mahomes rules. So you remember when Jordan was going through it with the Pistons, all those guys in the 80s before he came, Michael Jordan, Air Jordan, the Pistons used to whoop his. Anytime he came to the hole, elbows, filling them, love taps. We touched them. We in the head, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I'm touching you.
Lots of layers to that, but let's go to the first part of it. News or noise that AP and the Raiders have the recipe of how to beat the Chiefs.
That's a lot of noise. That's a lot of noise. That is a lot of that's a truckload. That's the Arthur Smith truckload of noise right there. Yeah, I mean, you got to be kidding me. I mean, did he watch how they changed? Look, they completed one pass after the first quarter. It wasn't until the last drive of the game that they were able to run the ball. I mean, you know, Antonio Pierce is becoming a showman. And if that's what you want as your head coach, go ahead. You know me, Stormy. I'm not that showman guy. I like strategists. I like tacticians. I'm not of all that. He keeps talking about this, and he keeps putting out this challenge to Patrick Mahomes. I think you want to let a sleeping dog lie. Just let him lay over there. Like, don't go pet the tiger. That was a line I used to use all the time when Mr. Davis was out on the practice field and standing there, and some stupid coach would walk by him, and then he'd get his butt ripped for it. And I said, you're an idiot. Like, why would you ever go pet a tiger? No. Well, why would you walk by him? He's a tiger. You're going to get your butt beat. Like, seriously, why would you stir up the Chiefs? Like, they're laughing. They're laughing at him.
I understand.
And I think, to me, there's got to be more substance to this than just rah-rah. Well, we're not in high school.
Exactly. I understand hyping up your team and trying to, like, give them some confidence, but, like, let's not also be delusional. We're, like, living in Delulu land. The recipe is not completing a pass for 3 quarters and having 2 defensive scores in 7 seconds. If that's the recipe, good luck. Like, it's going to be...
He's insulting. He's insulting us.
What?
He's insulting our intelligence with this stuff. Like, be a head coach. Be a strategist. Keep your mouth shut. Don't put the gauntlet out. I mean, to me, he's just becoming P.T. Barnum. He's going out there selling stuff.
It is time for Palms Pressing 3. What do we got today?
All right, Michael, number 1. In this coaching cycle that we're in the NFL, what is the most baffling staff hire to you?
Head coach, assistant coach, or
I was focusing on assistants or coordinators. What decision are you scratching your head about?
I was surprised at the Kellen Moore hiring here in Philly because, you know, Philly's success was with the run game, right? I mean, Shane Steichen did a great job of the RPO game, the run game, and I don't see that as being Kellen Moore's specialty. I think one of the things he's doing, he's got a bright offensive mind, but in terms of how he managed the game, I kind of thought that one, although, he's very well, he's popular. I thought the Roman hire for Jim to go back to him again after his brother fired him they say they didn't fire him. You know how that goes. But that reality of it is with no passing game and you have Justin Herbert there, that staff to me, as much as I love Jim, that offensive staff is a little bit confusing in the sense that you've got Herbert, you've got his coach at quarterbacks, you got Roman, then you got Mark Trestman as a senior assistant. There's a lot of personalities in those places. And I thought the Anthony Weaver hire in Miami was fascinating in that sense because Weaver's a defensive line coach. He's never really coached the back end, so it's going to take some kind of co-coordinator type stuff to get that worked out. And I think walking in there and having to replace Vic, who the players didn't really like because he was too demanding on them. Well, what does that tell you about what's going on with their program, right? Like, you're in South Florida. You're going to have to be demanding and hold people accountable to football and those things because there's a lot of stuff to do in South Florida. So off the top of my head, Mike, those would be the ones that I would look at and say, wait a minute, that those kind of made me shift and wonder what the heck was going on.
What about you, Mike? Did you have any that really caught you by surprise?
No. So that's why I wanted to get Michael as maybe a tell for future bets on teams with coordinator decisions. It's interesting you brought up Greg Roman because I brought it up from the opposite standpoint and no hyperbole this morning. Number 2 was get the flock out of here, and it was about the parting of ways with Greg Roman because he couldn't develop the passing game with Lamar. But here in this AFC Championship game, the number 1 rushing offense in all of football, averaging 5 yards a carry, only ran the ball 18 times. They were down 17-7 at half. You would have thought it was 27-7 the way they played the second half. Lose the turnover battle 3-0. And time of possession 38-22. They totally abandoned the physical style of play against the Chiefs. And oh, by the way, a little mud in your eye to brother here. I'm going to hire Greg Roman now to run the charge. I thought there was a lot of irony in that. Okay, Michael, let's go to question number 2. I don't know where to start the process because I know it's never ending, but I want to talk to you about or ask you about player evaluation from a draft standpoint, but how does that whole process work throughout the course of the year? So I picked an arbitrary spot of, let's just say teams are reporting to training camp. From an organization's player evaluation, what does that look like in July and August all the way through the college football season and into the draft? What is that whole process that obviously continues over and over each year?
Well, the process from the time you go to training camp to the time the season ends or you get there, it's all done by the personnel department, the college scouts, the personnel director. They're accumulating all the data and information, and they're setting their board up, right? And they're putting together what they see as the value of the players. They're making sure they're doing the guys who are going to be junior eligibles that come out or people that declare. And then once that's done, then they take that list and they try to include the assistant coaches into it, but not the broader sense of the list. So if you're the running back coach for the Raiders, you may get 15 guys to look at the combine. You don't know their grades. You may have to interview 10 of them. You don't know their backgrounds. There's very limited changing of information. You'll know enough to ask questions, but you're not going to know all the details. And then you write your reports and you submit them. And sometimes some organizations will have meetings to go over what you wrote about. Some won't. Some will just take them and look at them. Some will listen to the assistants. Some won't. A lot of this comes from how much authority the head coach has, and then how good the evaluators are on his staff and who he trusts to go out and evaluate. So once the season's over, then there's the mixture of taking the college information to the pro people and letting them look at it. When you have a decision of quarterbacking, you're going to try to get the people that certainly the offensive coordinator, the head coach, the general manager, all the people that are paid to make a hard decision are going to be involved in it. As you can see, when you have too many people involved, you end up making the wrong decision. And I think the challenge for most teams are to get everybody aligned, right? It's to get everybody to understand what might be good for another team may not be good for us. And so, and it's funny you say this, we're having a seminar today on the Daily Coach at 4:00. It's free, and we're going to talk about this exact subject. It's about really, who do you want your team to be, and how do you visualize your team, and what grading system do you have to utilize that? And the same thing applies in business, whether you're hiring for Circa, whether you're hiring for the Raiders. You have to have criteria for each position. A lot of teams don't spend enough time on that criteria, so scouts are just scouting outside in, not inside out.
All right, final question, Michael. Have we come to an era to put an end to these all-star, all-pro games? Baseball's the only one that has any resemblance to the actual game they played. This travesty in Sunday in Indianapolis, I mean, it was an interesting betting situation. We opened this game 366.5 and closed 353.5, a 13-point move to the under, because Adam Silver said, we're going to have a competitive game. It's not going to be like last year. Joe Dumars beat the drum. Everybody bet under, and the game should have had
almost 400 points scored.
173 I mean, it's really a joke. And football went to the flags, and I mean, it has nothing to do with. Isn't this really just about a resume for a Hall of Fame? I was a first-team All-Pro. I was All-Pro. I was in the All-Star, and the skills competition, which is the fun part of it, the three-point contest, the quarterback's accuracy contest, and all that. Isn't that what it should be? And stop trying to pretend that we're going to have a game that's something like what we see during the regular season.
I couldn't agree more. Now, baseball, it fits. Basketball, it should fit, right? It should fit. They should play harder. I mean, it's a game that we should be able to enjoy. That, it's we're not saying it's going to be intense, lockdown, Detroit Pistons, Chicago Bulls style with Chuck Daly on the sideline type of game, but we are saying it should showcase athleticism and talent, but not lack of effort like we're seeing. And I think that's the case. Football, I completely agree with the direction it's going in. It's too risky for those guys to play in an all-star game and get hurt. It's just too risky. The finances don't work anymore. It used to be, Mike, that they went to go play in the hula ball and made money on it, and it was important money that they needed to supplement their income and get more money. That ain't the case anymore, right? You got bonuses in your contract, the TV money. Really the bigger issue for the NBA and for a lot of leagues other than football is the NFL's. Stormy asked this question today based on the PF Pro Football Report saying the cap was going to go up. The money that's coming into the players in the NFL is going to increase the cap. The money the NBA may not be getting is going to maybe decrease their cap. And that's when they're going to have problems with their players, because no player likes to take a pay cut. But if you're not bringing in revenue or bringing in ratings, how the hell do you keep charging the networks, which fund the leagues, what they're going to have to pay?